We'll get to our other couple of texts in just a few minutes about seeking the lost. Making our way through Luke, I had to skip one of the best sections. This is on the cost of discipleship out of Luke 14. The reason I had to skip it is because we kind of did it last week. These are the high cost of discipleship, how difficult discipleship is meant to be, what it means to take up your cross and follow. Kind of last week's sermon on get some more spine. It's a tough time to do ministry in. So we're letting that go. Go back and read it when you get a chance. And then this. The passage that Jeff read called the Great Dinner or the Great Feast. Some have said the church is the only organization, like the only club, who exists for the benefits of its non-members. It's an interesting reminder that we're supposed to be aiming beyond these walls all the time for our identity, for our purpose, for why we're here. And so that's we're doing some foundational work today. In his great book that we've been studying as a congregation and in Bible studies, The Great Spiritual Migration, Brian McLaren had us looking at movements and institutions. Institutions more stable, and movements come up beneath them to inform them, challenge them, hopefully change them so the movement itself can go on to something else or cease to be. He talked about this dance, and that's a little bit where we are today as well. The tension of reformed and always reforming, the tension of having an institution like Genesis or the Presbyterian Church or the Christian Church worldwide that continues to need redeveloping, and how challenging that is from inside as well as from the outside. McLaren talked two things I want you to know about social movement theory, a strange thing to bring up, except that it's terribly relevant, and this morning it's really helpful for me as preacher. He talks about opportunity structures. A few years back when we did our New Beginnings, we looked at opportunity structures, which is to say, we look around at what's going on in society, what the trends are that shape us if we're going to be anything. That there's an opportunity that wasn't here 10 and 50 years ago and might not be here another 5 or 10. We know now what's happening. How should our ministry be shaped? How should you and I be shaped? By virtue of being people of a time and place. That even shapes how we do our work. All right? Important first step, and we read some of those very challenging questions in worship. I had great conversations this past week in Bible studies about what's going on, what the church is doing well, what we've failed at, etc. That's all opportunity structure. The second piece of social movement theory that I need you to know is what McLaren refers to as rhetorical framing. That seems very technical and heady, except it's really important and very helpful. He says, once you see what the opportunity structure is, what needs to be done, then what language do we use? How do we shape and structure our argument, our rhetoric, our description, our prescription, all those things, so they might be reframed in a more helpful way to address this opportunity. He calls it conceptual architecture, and that's very relevant for the church especially. How do we hang our ideas? How do we conceive of what we're up to? Because when we talk to one another, it needs to be in such a way, and this is what movements have to do, is the punchline from McLaren. Movements have to decide what kind of language they're probably going to limit themselves to say, why are you in existence? Why are you so mad at the institution? What are you trying to change? How will you know when you've succeeded? All that kind of thing. It's about language. Which is to all say we need to be redirected outside continually to see what we're up to. More on that, and it's really the main point today. A little subtle point that might help, though. We are today, more than ever before, plural in our identity. Here's what I mean. 2 generations ago, it would have been a big deal to marry across denominational lines, for a Presbyterian to marry a Lutheran. And so we'd feel concerned about that. We'd have to do all this work to make sure that today we think nothing of Methodist, Lutheran, Episcopal. These denominational differences, we agree, are pretty insignificant. Today we've taken a huge step of saying sometimes we can have kids marry non-Protestants, Catholics. We've developed our lines even bigger. And for many of us, or our kids to marry, become affixed to, our friends be non-Christians entirely. In so doing, as we watched our kids leave our traditions, be in a different field, we've had to split our identities because we know and love these people, and we know that, yes, while I might be a Presbyterian, the person I'm sitting next to might not be. The person I'm married to, the people I love the most, could be a long ways from that. We have learned by necessity to have a more plural identity, to have our own being and even tie to God be based in a number of different places. That's a challenge in its own right. It's a kind of postmodern challenge. For today's purposes, it's going to help us know why we choose some language and not other language. What it means to choose language that might not be our personal favorite, but might really address the people we love and care and want to reach about the most. We look at the church around us, the decline of the institution especially, that's been going on for a century or more, with a couple of exceptions in the 50s and maybe in the 80s. We look at what we have failed to do in terms of being a compelling force in society, what we failed to do in many ways in terms of justice, peace, equality. What we've succeeded in many ways doing other good deeds, letting the world know, but we have to take seriously also in our opportunity. What's the challenge? What aren't we doing that we should be doing? So there today, what I want to really end with is the most traditional bulletin cover I've put together in my 30 years of doing ministry. Seeking the lost is traditional Christian language. I'm about to explain to you why I think it's irrelevant and why no one uses it anymore, except for those in the church. I'm about to explain to you why I think it's no longer an adequate representation of what the gospel is. And that's hard news. Utterly unsurprising to all the empty chairs and all of your friends who aren't in church this morning. What do we mean by lost? So, turn to Luke, these other great passages about being lost. Luke chapter 15. I'm on page 78 of your Pew Bible if you're following along, or you can just listen to. You'll recognize some of these little images, stories. This first one is the parable of the lost sheep. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to him, and the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable. "Which one of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? When he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders and rejoices. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost.' Just so I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance." What a great, tender story. I had a hard time finding a non-white Jesus. In the upper left is about as dark skin I could find. We know Jesus wouldn't look as white as me, but all our pictures seem to be of a white guy, in some cases from California, apparently, kind of tanned, but great hair. And so these are the tender pictures of Jesus getting the lost sheep. Really one of our favorite images. If you're like me, you probably have these in your Sunday school classroom or in your home. Some wonderful pictures of what Jesus does for us and the risk of leaving the 99 for how important saving one is. And then the parable of the lost coin. "Or what woman, having 10 silver coins, if she loses one of them, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? When she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I had lost.' Just so, I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." Really, the same story told in two different ways. Here's the woman sweeping her house, getting the one precious coin to be lost. So, today, to talk about seeking the lost, I want to stand up in a place that is personal, what Jesus does for me, what Jesus does for you, a warm-hearted tenderness, one-on-one, something that really matters to me. That's how we recognize we've been aligned with Scripture and how Jesus taught about salvation. Then also, I think about the coin especially, it's going to be something very practical. It could be very concrete. What's more mundane than losing some money? Jesus says, that's important to you. Jesus, who teaches about so much spirituality, says, I know how important money is. Yeah. So we know finding is going to have those two elements. And then turn with me to maybe this must be the most famous of all lost stories, about the prodigal. starting with verse 11. The parable, I like how the title, they've changed this in my time. It used to be called the parable of the prodigal son. And now it's called the parable of the prodigal and his brother. Key. Really helpful.
Well, it's really about the brother.
I think you can make a case that one of the most compelling characters is the brother. So here we go. Jesus said, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." So he divided his property between them. And a few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout the country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, and who sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare, and here I am dying of hunger? I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set out and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then his son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now, his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing, and he called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. The slave replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has got him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I've been working like a slave for you, and I've never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours comes back who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' And the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found.'